and good afternoon, everyone. Look, my job this afternoon is to give you a brief overview of MLA's investment in Pasture Dieback research. So this includes some limited insights that came from MLA's investment in the emergency response and research that started in 2018. And where we are going to head with the use of short-term funding from the Commonwealth Government, which was granted during that emergency response period. So MLA successfully put in an application with the Department of Environment and Science, sorry, I beg your pardon, the Department of Agriculture and Environment, and we've received $2.7 million of funding. Some of that has been already invested in new research, and MLA will be matching that funding. So on a dollar for dollar basis, we will invest a further $2.7 million over the next 2 to 3 years. So that creates a funding pool in excess of $5 million that will be applied to the problem. So as has already been mentioned by others today, and I won't labour the point, our understanding is that pasture dieback is probably a disease complex, and there has not been a definitive identification of a single causal agent, but our understanding is that there are a number of cofactors or other causal agents that are probably involved in the expression of dieback, and that complex is yet to really be unravelled. There has been some research certainly focusing on the pasture mealybug, and that is continuing with Queensland University of Technology, and that research is being led by Professor Carrie Hawkswell. There has been definitive identification of Heliococcus somervillei, the pasture mealybug, as the same species that has been involved in historical or associated with historical outbreaks of pasture dieback going back as far as the 1920s. There's probably sufficient evidence, I think, really to conclude that that combination of soil conditions, so the soil health status, and probably links with things like insects such as mealybug or ground pearls, climatic factors, all probably converge to affect pasture dieback expression, and probably may be associated with risk of pasture dieback. I'll just try and advance the slide. Here we are. Oh, gone too far. So in work under the emergency response, it was on a fairly broad front of activity involving certainly trying to understand causal agents, looking at pasture agronomy and pasture composition, management strategies. There was work also around detection, which involved remote satellite imagery and trying to develop identification technology to map and monitor the spread of pasture dieback. And there has been pasture trial work looking at resistant species and the roles of things like legumes, forage crops, and various cultivation strategies that might limit the impact of pasture dieback and help with resurgence of pastures. So some of the work looking at soil health, there are about 50 properties which were sampled for soil and grass tissues, and a variety of tests applied to that sampling, those samples. And they are assessed primarily for their physical soil attributes, so looking at things like soil structure, compaction, also looking at soil chemistry, particularly looking at soil fertility, pH, cation exchange capacity, soil carbon status, and so forth, and also looking at the soil microbiology, looking at for pathogens, those soil microbes involved in nutrient cycling, and also beneficial microorganisms, things like mycorrhizal fungi and endophytes that may exist in plants and on root structures that would provide protection. So, so across all those sites and looking at the analysis of the data, there was no single causal agent identified or disease pathology across all of those sites. Probably what is clear is that the general soil condition, or the condition of the soil health, was often poor. There could be generally a lack, particularly of beneficial microorganisms that might keep pathogens and soil pathogens under control. So that balance between fungi and bacteria was probably um, out of whack. Soil fertility was also often low, but generally never critically low. And there are often no sort of common threads running across those sites despite different soil type. We also looked at some experiments looking at agronomic trials, which were conducted in 4 regions, and these explored a number of different treatment options to see if there were options that could control pasture dieback and prevent its resurgence. There was a focus on cultural practices, things like slashing and burning, ploughing, reseeding and resowing pastures, the use of legumes, spraying fungicides, insecticides, application of different fertilizers and soil conditioners or soil improvers, including some looking at biologicals. And the results of those trials, again, are somewhat inconclusive. When we look at pasture biomass and the impact of pasture composition and pardon me, and control strategies and use of fertilizer technologies, I guess the best responses to pasture recovery were around, pardon me, resowing and with a combination of grass and legume mix and some level of fertilizer to ensure that there isn't a nutritional or fertility gap. So that gave really the best outcome, and a lot of the practices like burning and cultivation only really provided short-term relief. So there was, at this stage, there is really limited advice regarding on management practices that might be available to producers. So where we're going from here, MLA has been having close discussions with New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, as well as Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, and we've heard from both of these agencies this afternoon. And also we are working closely with a number a number of universities and other research providers to build on the research that has been started. Our investment plan, so which is this sort pardon me, this plan on a page, looks very similar to the work that's been mapped out and supported by the Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries. But our intention is to work as collaboratively and as closely together that we can with these agencies and organisations for the use of the remaining Commonwealth grant funds that we have and for the available MLA levy funding over the next 2 to 3 years. So the research program will be structured along 3 lines. The first area where there has been a little bit of new investment going on, as I mentioned, with Queensland University of Technologies, is looking at possible causal agents. So we will be furthering the work research into mealybugs, understanding its life cycle, and testing it out on a range of grasses, also looking at natural enemies of mealybugs. There will be work supported around ground pearls and looking at a whole range of diagnostic tools to investigate soil condition and soil health. We will be looking at detection technologies, so this will include further work around using UAV technology and looking at probably multispectral and hyperspectral imaging and using that for mapping and prediction, if possible, of areas at risk to pasture dieback. We will be investing also in managed interventions, so further trial work looking at what short-term solutions there may be to provide feed for livestock as a result of pasture dieback, so possibly the role of things like forage crops, but further work into resistant grasses species if they can be found, and combinations of pasture and legume species if they turn out to be one of the more effective strategies. So some of the thinking here is by introducing complexity of in pasture composition and moving away from monocultures, that we may actually be able to enhance the role of things like natural predators as part of an integrated pest management strategy. So this might complement other technologies such as the use of chemicals. So there has been an emergency permit that has been granted for Movento, which is produced by Bayer. So this active ingredient is spirotetramat. So that may have a role if used at the right time and the right circumstances in control of pasture dieback. But there may also be other biologicals that we can investigate that would introduce things like entomopathogenic nematodes or fungi, for example. So these are naturally occurring fungi and nematodes that occur in the soil that might have an important role in controlling pests and pathogens. So that's a potential area for future research as well. And we'll be working very closely with, as I said, New South Wales DPI and QDAF around industry engagement. We have an industry advisory group that is helping us to formulate the messages and the tools that we want to develop for industry. So that will be in collaboration with others. So I guess in short, what I wanted to say is it's unlikely there will be a simple solution or a silver bullet for industry, but we are working as quickly as we can to try and deliver solutions for industry. Thank you. That's all from me.